For analysis on these developments, joining us from Washington, D.C. is Michael Purcell, an adjunct professor at George Washington University, teaching Russia and international security. Thank you so much for your time. So it was just earlier this month that there was some possibility of a deal between Russia and Ukraine, or even more talks. But with these intense attacks that we've seen over the last few days, is an end to this war further now than ever before?
I think your correspondent in Kyiv gave a good summation of that, and certainly from their perspective and from the U.S. or Russia, I would imagine the answer is no. It doesn't seem a likely scenario at the moment, but I also think maybe that's a problem with expectations. And I know we're focused on President Trump's comments in recent days. In his prior comments that set an expectation for sort of a quick and, as he sort of projected, easy settlement to this conflict was, I think, terribly naive, and that's pretty clear to see at the moment.
And it then doesn't help that Trump is calling Vladimir Putin absolutely crazy. That's a direct quote, while he's also been very critical of Volodymyr Zelensky, saying he really has to watch his mouth and what he is saying. If the U.S. does pull out of trying to facilitate any sort of ceasefire, where does that leave Ukraine? Can they still count on Washington for military support?
I'll go slowly in answering that. I think the first thing is to take a quick look at the domestic situation in the U.S. President Trump clearly hasn't prioritized ending this conflict in his first several months in office. It would certainly hurt him if he failed to. He promised to, and he would lose credibility. I don't think it's high on the list of his core supporters' priorities, and that's reflected his relative lack of commitment. But let's take a look at the U.S. Congress and Senate. At the moment, there's, I believe, upwards of 70, maybe 82 is the number I think I heard today, co-sponsors in the Senate for legislation to impose secondary sanctions. So not necessarily on Russia, but on those countries that are purchasing Russian oil, for example, 500% tariff on those countries. So we're seeing pressure from Congress, both the House and the Senate, against the administration, and that's not unprecedented. We've seen in the U.S. The Senate take a strong, firm role in asserting themselves in U.S. foreign policy. So let's keep an eye on them as well. I think is maybe more helpful than trying to parse through the president's clearly impulsive and often inconsistent rhetoric.
Michael, I just want to pivot here to something that the German Chancellor has now said, saying that Ukraine can attack military positions using Western-made weapons, effectively lifting those restrictions on long-range attacks into Russia. The Russians are not happy about that. They're saying that could mean NATO is now directly taking part in the war. How do you see that playing out?
But I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's important to take a second and reflect on the idea that the German Chancellor, the largest country in continental Europe by economically or otherwise, is taking this assertive role, right? And he's taking it on behalf of the European Union, in effect. The U.S., obviously is in NATO, as the European countries, but for the EU, effectively to develop their own defense identity, to assert themselves in this conflict, particularly Germany, is something it's something new. And whether that's good or bad, whether that's due to the lack of leadership from the U.S., whether that's intentional or unintentional, it's really important. And maybe we end up where the U.S. is sort of shamed, if you will, into following the German lead on this one at the moment.
It'll be interesting to see how that does play out. Michael Purcell in Washington, D.C. Appreciate your time and analysis. Thank you.
Thank you.